All right, thanks to Robin and the CP Alliance for asking me to come over. I did a conference yesterday, a community care conference. That's why I'm here. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. This is an interesting occasion for me because a lot of my work has to do usually with business models of technology, with governments, with companies who are trying to reinvent themselves. I used to be, a long time ago, I was a musician and producer. I made 10 records, I lived in San Francisco, and I moved on the internet afterwards, and I realized that all over the time in my professional life, I was always ahead of the curve a little bit. So in 2000, I went bankrupt with my internet company, like most internet companies went bankrupt in those days. And I had to fire 150 people and essentially reboot my life. And I was thinking the whole time that basically the idea wasn't wrong, it was just way too early. So I made a job out of this. I wrote a book in 2004 called The Future of Music, about the music business. And that became a bestseller, and very soon people started calling me and saying, well, you know about the future, tell us about the future. And so I didn't know what the future is or was, and probably neither do you. I mean, it sounds kind of like Nostradamus or a crystal ball or predictions or some miracle wand or something. So that was in the States, and then I moved back to Germany in around 2002, and now I live in Switzerland. So what I do really can be described best like this. I do a lot of work on trying to understand what is happening today and what might be happening in the next 3 to 5 years. And there's a Chinese saying that you may know, a lot of smart sayings in China. One of them is, if you want to know about the future, ask your children. Because clearly that kids are not occupied with creating business models or world domination. Right? Or politics for that matter. Right? They just play with things. So most kids understand what is happening and they can tell you very clearly where it's going. So if I ask my kids, they're now kind of grown up, but still if I observe them, I can tell where things are going to be happening there. Right? For example, what people are now doing about money, for most kids, money is no longer physical. It's just something that you spend in various ways, Bitcoin and PayPal, and it's digital. And what kids are doing on social networks is essentially exposing themselves to others so that they can create this sort of communal idea of creating something together, like Facebook has shown. So I take these trends and I work them backwards. So my approach is basically like this.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll fail completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable can be any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen.
So this is Arthur C. Clarke from 1941. And basically what he's saying is like to be unreasonable is the key. Because if we're always reasonable, we're never going to invent anything. I mean, who would reasonably invent the self-driving car, right, that Google has invented? That sounds like a stupid idea, right? But the self-driving car is in fact the future of the car. Right? So in particular in this area of technology that has to do with disabilities, we have hundreds of inventions that are actually happening right now that sound like science fiction. Right? So it's a very exciting time if you have any disablement, I mean, regardless of the range of it. I mean, for us, who are able-bodied, so to speak, some of this stuff is very scary because think about, for example, being able to augment your body so you can lift a car. For a healthy person, this is a sort of military improvement, right? But for a disabled person to be able to walk by using thought control is a dream come true. Right? So technology has sort of both angles. I'll talk more about this. So my skill is to look backwards from the future. One thing you don't want to do is to look at what's happening today and then extrapolate forward. So say I'm using an iPad, and so in 3 years I have a better iPad. Well, that's probably true, but let's think about what's going to happen 5 years and work backwards. So what do we know what's going to happen in 5 years? There's a bunch of things that we know. This is an example, of course, from a cartoon from the 50s, the self-driving car. In 5 to 8 years, probably not in this country because it's a big country and it's, there aren't that many people really. But in cities like Singapore and Las Vegas and Zurich and London, we have self-driving cars that you can use your mobile phone to click on a button and it shows up. Okay? And it will very likely be free. Okay? Now, we're already experimenting, for example, in Las Vegas, there's a trial for disabled people to be able to use the app, to just sit and push the button and the car drives up, and it's actually set up for you to roll right into it with an automatic driving system. Of course, that only works on sort of a grid, you know, it doesn't work on every road. Right? So, however, having looked at this, I mean, the car companies that I work with, like Volkswagen and others, they know that in the next 10 years, we're switching from the car as a status symbol, you know, or as a fun tool, you know, to move around and have some fun with, to a mobility device. So there's already cities like Singapore contemplating buying 10,000 self-driving electric vehicles that people can subscribe to. So looking backwards is important. So I want to look backwards with you today a little bit. And one thing that's really quite clear here is that we're becoming a digital society. Okay, this is amazing, all the things that we can see and the amount of innovation that goes into technology. Having said that, of course, I'm not a technologist. You know, I don't really care about technology as by itself. And I think there's also a lot of trappings there that we have to consider also for our patients, for your patients and people that you take care of. There's a lot of good things, but there's also things we should not be too mistaken about that can be addictive or can replace humans, get us out of jobs. We'll talk more about that in a second. But here we see on this graph, global population will be an estimated 8 to 9 billion people by 2020. Not because of us, we're having less kids, but on a global range, you know, we're having to be larger populations. So the thing here is that with about 9 billion people will top out eventually and then it will decline. For example, in Europe, we're not actually replenishing the population, we're declining. But the red bar shows you that we'll have at least 60% of those people connected to the internet. Probably 5 years later, 80%. So this means a lot because all of a sudden, for example, we have every possible publication in every language by every person in the food chain, even if they're very poor. For example, in Brazil and Africa, Indonesia, China, India. So this really changes the way that we're looking at the future. And I think this is really impacting what you can do in the business, so to speak, in the sector of taking care of disabled or people who have issues. And of course, the elderly and the disenfranchised. My good friend Ross Dawson, who is actually here from Sydney, so next time you want a futurist to come in very quickly, you can ask Ross. He made this really mind-boggling chart. Okay? And it's overwhelming, of course. Much of what I will tell you is overwhelming, by the way, if you haven't noticed. But you can chew on it for the next couple of weeks until we see each other again. And by the way, you can download my presentation later from my website. So if you're missing something, just go to Futurist Gerd. The best way to remember my name is to use the acronym, gastrointestinal reflux disease. That's my name, right? Gerd. So Futurist Gerd, very easy to remember, right? So going back to this, what Ross is saying, there's a bunch of things that are disappearing in the next 10 years, and then there's a whole bunch of really bizarre and far-out things that sound like science fiction that are appearing in the next 10 years. And many of those things you may say, oh, this is like Star Trek or like Minority Report or The Matrix or whatever. It's actually true. I mean, if you're looking at this, what's happening in this whole area of robots and 3D printing, which means that you can print, for example, a physical object like a cup, you know, like you can print now in a Xerox machine. So Ross is saying that we're going to see, for example, the end of spelling because, you know, we can talk to the computer and it will do its own spelling. We'll see the end of privacy because, you know, we're essentially naked to the police at any given time, especially in this country. The end of switching off. So, I mean, not all of those things, of course, are timing-wise accurate, but basically what's happening here is that we're facing a huge amount of change. And this change is now at this level because finally technology has gotten to be so powerful and cheap that these things are entirely possible. I mean, the NSA and the American law enforcement agencies, they can save every single person's email, phone calls, and web browsing forever because these machines are cheap now. I mean, this would have been impossible just 5 years ago. So if you zoom 5 years in the future, every conversation, every video, every movement, everything you do on your mobile device can be saved forever. That's good news and bad news, I suppose, but we'll talk more about that. So basically what we're looking at is transformation. Your jobs are going to be utterly transformed by this. If you are disabled, your future is utterly transformed by these new options. In terms of politics, having things like this available cannot be just available for those that have lots of money. Because what it creates is inequality, which ultimately creates terrorism and problems of rejection. So what we're seeing here is that this transformation is driving across all those domains: business, politics, jobs. So it's quite clear that looking at what we do today, in 5 years, at least half of what we do will be completely different. It doesn't even exist today. So if you're looking, for example, in technology like the Kindle, the Amazon Kindle, the book reader, right? Didn't even exist 5 years ago. Now Amazon sells more books on the Kindle than they sell in print. Okay. 5 years. 5 years ago, there was no iPhone. I think there was one maybe 5 years ago. So 6 or 7, no iPhone, no iPad. Today, that's over 50% of Apple's revenues comes from this new device. So ask yourself a simple question. In this transformation, in 5 years, what is this arrow? Where are you going to go with your job? Or if you are disabled, what will be available to you? So that's mind-boggling because technology is getting to be so fast, and we have serious role changes. For example, I do a lot of work with doctors in hospitals, which is an interesting turf because doctors aren't exactly known for being open about what they're going to do in the future. They tend to be more like it's about their work and how they're going to control what they do at work. And it turns out in Switzerland, for example, that 80% of what a doctor does could actually be done by somebody else that would be just slightly more authorized than a nurse. That's not new, but now this study has shown in Switzerland that we can save 30% of cost of healthcare to take some of the jobs that a doctor used to do and basically augment other people around the doctor using technology to enable them to do it, including what's called telemedicine. So if you're at home sitting and you're not easy to move around, it's hard for you to get somewhere, you can use a telemedicine device that reads your body temperature and your other readings and transmits it to a doctor who then makes decisions about the next step. That alone is a huge change. So I'll show you this short clip about what's happening with doctors there. And this is actually a good thing. In Switzerland, the doctors have responded and have said, this is not bad, maybe we can work less. Of course, that would be they also make less money, but this is a slightly different angle. But for example, the other day I went to the doctor, another doctor that I usually don't go to, and as I was waiting, I Googled what they had said that I should look at, right? And I found this really interesting treatment, homeopathic treatment. And I went to see the doctor and I said, look, I found this, it sounds interesting, should we try this? I know my friend of mine is a homeopathic doctor. And he said, what do you mean? I'm the doctor. I was like, well, I just looked it up. And he wasn't actually willing to understand, to look at what I had brought in, right? He was not happy with this idea of me having any knowledge, right? So this is a real threat, this is a serious role change. And I think if you are taking care of disabled people, we're in the same spot. Because the empowerment of disabled people is going to radically explode. Empowerment in terms of knowledge, in terms of network, in terms of physical movement. Here's a short clip.
Our next story here tonight, we're about to hear one of the world's top physicians say the smartphone may change his profession and personal medical care in ways none of us saw coming. His story tonight from Dr. Nancy Snyder.
Why do we have people being treated like cattle herd? That's waste. And the billions of dollars that's being wasted each year for screening and the wrong drugs and the wrong everything. It's astounding. And we just can't go on like this.
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks.
Dr. Eric Topol has long been one of the world's foremost cardiologists.
Hey, great to see you.
He has now become the foremost expert in the exploding field of wireless medicine. And this explosion, he says, is about to make our healthcare better and cheaper. Watch what he does with his cell phone.
And we'll just pop this iPhone into it like that.
He shows how simply his modified iPhone produces a cardiogram for a patient.
So you just put your fingers on that, there you go. And in a second, you know, in the first second, then it's staying off.
So basically what you do is you beef up what you already have, and all of a sudden it makes a cardiogram. And to make a cardiogram, otherwise you have to go see the doctor, go to the hospital. I mean, just to do this. Right? So if wireless medicine takes off and these devices, I think this thing costs like $50, they're going to be $2. And then we have another 50 of those. Right? Then we're looking at things like do-it-yourself medicine, DIY medicine. I mean, who would be in charge of this? And who should be in charge of it? So those are the things that we're going to look at. So Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, a great quote from him said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence and change is not the turbulence itself, but to act with yesterday's logic." Of course, we're all acting with yesterday's logic. You know, that's the only logic we have. Right? But the problem is that when we don't sit down sometimes to review our logic, then we're always proceeding in the same direction because we're basically just augmenting it a little bit. So when I worked in the music business as a musician and then later on as a producer and then as an advisor to the record labels, the record labels basically said, look, the problem is that if people download music for free, we can't sell it, so therefore we're dead if they're downloading for free, and therefore we're going to sue them to stop downloading for free. That was the whole logic. Turns out, not true. People can download music for free. They're only doing it, by and large, right? Because there's no other good way of getting it through the network. You know? There's no other plausible deal. Right? So by the time they got around to realizing that their logic was from yesterday, which was about distribution, essentially, controlling distribution, they lost 71% of their business because they were holding on to this old logic. Okay? So here's a simple example. Do you remember these guys? Okay? Everybody used these guys, and they were huge. That's the only thing you could use for photos. Then digital photography came along and said, you know, we can do all this, and you can delete, and you can zoom, and you can do all these things. And the CEO of Kodak said, this is not photography. This is a gadget. And it's a gimmick. Okay? Then the wireless companies came along with mobile phones that all had cameras. And people were making photos with cameras and then sending those around. And Kodak still said, you know, we don't need this, that's not serious, it's not really good photography. And it may be true that, you know, you can do different things with film, obviously. But the end was this, right? United States bankruptcy court. Kodak basically had the logic of saying, you know, this is what we think is real, and this is what we're going to do, and never mind what else is happening, we'll just keep on ignoring it. In 4 years, they went from the biggest photo company in the world to being bankrupt. Nobody wanted to even buy their building. So this is about thinking about what the future holds. And this is our challenge. You know, technology is exponential. So when you count exponential, you count 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. If you count 100 times, you're at 1 billion. When you count to 100, you count to 100. So now the problem is, with technology is, this red curve here, is that it's exploding in potential. And there's a law called Moore's law that says every 18 months we have twice the power of computing. So we're now at this point here to where we're at the takeoff point. So we're essentially counting 1, 2, 4, and the next step is 8, it's not 5. Right? So in the next 18 months, twice as much power and technology. After that, 4 times as much, and then so on, right? You can exponentiate from there. So the stuff that you have imagined in your wildest dreams is becoming reality in our lifetime and in our kids' lifetime. That's not always a good thing because, there's lots of debates about whether we should be able to buy a new arm, maybe borrow one on eBay or something. But we are facing this. So now basically what's happening is that humans, of course, in terms of what we do, we are linear. We can't read faster because we Twitter. We can't date more people because we have Facebook. We're limited by, we are linear. So therein is one of the challenges of care, in my view, is that this turf will absolutely explode. And we're looking at things that will be basically straight out of science fiction in 20 years. But we're still going to be the same people. They're dealing with the same human emotions and the same human needs. And we don't want to replace people by technology. Well, sometimes we do. If it's like a cab driver can eventually be replaced by technology, right? Or a checkout clerk we don't have a relationship with for the most part. But a caregiver coming to your house, you don't want that person to be replaced by some software. But maybe that person can use a robot to lift you. So we're getting into interesting discussions about what happens with this. But the nature of technology is this. Again, I'm not a tech guy, but I understand it. So the nature of technology is not yes or no. It depends. Okay. Take, for example, the fact that we can all now connect through LinkedIn and Facebook and what have you with each other and find each other. So when I go to a meeting, I check you out on LinkedIn. Right? You look at me and say, this guy is an idiot, I shouldn't meet with him, or the other way around, but we're essentially becoming transparent. Now, if I'm not on LinkedIn, there's about 380 million people now on LinkedIn, then you would think I'm either very famous, right, or I don't care to connect with anyone, and so you would have a perception about me not being there as well. Right? So technology has this effect where we can say, that can be right or wrong. For example, 40% of American teenagers, if they wake up at night, they do a Facebook update. Right? I dreamt about bananas. Whatever. In Korea, there's 46 hospitals for internet addiction. Okay? Do you know what internet addiction is? Basically, you can't get off the machine. Right? In Indonesia, when you're having a dinner with people who are business people, they're all under the table working their BlackBerries. Everyone. Because, that's basically what you do. You're never fully there, you're always doing other stuff. Right? That's addiction. Right? Some level of addiction. Right? So, technology is not either right or wrong, it's on an it depends basis. For example, if you were thinking about that you don't want to be naked on the internet in terms of your data, when you think this through, you might end up with the Amish people in America, that don't have television, cars, or, completely disconnect yourself. But that's not something most of us would want to do. But you don't want to become a cyborg by using technology. So that's one thing. The other thing is technology doesn't have ethics. It's just there. So technology will tell us that if this person has a problem, we can use this software to fix it. It's as simple as that. It's just technology. So in America, where the land of technology, where most of these things are invented, used to be invented, you had this idea, for example, if we have a climate change problem, that's not a problem, we invent a huge machine that sucks the CO2 out of the atmosphere and puts it back into the tank. And if we have a problem with too much floods or rain, we invent geoengineering. Allows us to control the weather. Right? This is a kind of technology thinking. Right? There's no ethics behind that because it's possible, so we do it. So one thing I would propose to you is that when you're looking at technology, this is kind of what you have to look at. Is it good for that moment or is it not? Is it good for this one patient or for this one problem? Not in general. And also consider ethics. And the other thing is, of course, it's a balance. So it may be great for people to be able to connect through social networks to discuss their problems or their needs, or to get movies that they can watch together, or, for example, I can talk to my grandmother through Skype, and we can just leave it on for 4 hours, and she can watch me, right? That's okay. I don't want to leave it on 24 hours a day. I'm not going to ask her to put a camera in her bathroom. Right? I mean, people do that. Right? You probably know lots of those stories. Right? It's a question of balance. So balance is what we need for technology. Okay, when we think about technology, we can clearly say that we have dramatic empowerment. I mean, look at all these devices. That's 15 years ago. They're all in here now. All of them. And these devices are now going to be going down to a price, not the Apple ones, of course, but a price of roughly $20. $20. All of those were $10,000 in the past. So when you go to India, you can buy a tablet computer, a cheap one for $31 called the Akash. And I think 20 million people have bought it in the last month in India. So these devices will become essentially free. You could argue, free. If you can't talk and you can't type, then you're still, out of luck with those. But, of course, now there's augmentations to them, where it becomes interesting. So this universe of diving into the digital world of movies and news is now becoming unlocked for disabled people. It opens up a floodgate of things, good and bad, but mostly good, I think. Being able to actually do this in such a way. And the hindrance there has always been the interface, called the interface. So if you can't type, you can't control this thing. You can't speak like I can, then you can't tell it what to do. And of course, if you can't move at all, then you can't do anything. This is now being solved in a myriad of ways, and those things used to be very expensive. I'll show you some examples. You can expect in the next 5 years that basically the disablement of using technology is going away to a very large degree. And not just for the ones that have money. Because the price of these things are radically decreasing as well. So I looked this up last night as I was doing my final preparations. I was looking for apps, software that you can download for CP. And I found this list, and it's not just this list. It goes on to 150 offerings about what people with CP can do on their smartphones, to do different things like games and learn things and what have you. Some of them, I'm sure, are utterly ridiculous, but, I didn't have time to download any of them, but it's mind-boggling what's happening here. So this is where we're going in general, and just bear with me for a second here. Again, it sounds futuristic, but it's here, right? So in the old days of the internet, we sit in front of the computer, we type. And that rules out about 98% of the population, right? Because they can't type, or they don't have a computer, or they don't have a safe place to put one, they don't have a desktop, and so on and so on. So now, basically, that got to be better. We went more inside of the computer with the mobile phone, the tablet. Right? Now we have these devices that are essentially creating images like holograms and those kind of things we can dive into. And then the future is that the internet is inside of us. Right? Inside of us means that the interface is inside. So if you're a jet fighter pilot, this is completely normal to you, or wear the helmet, you're inside of a virtual environment. So you move your eye, it fires a rocket. Okay? This thing, of course, that costs millions of dollars. But now we're getting to the point where those devices like Google Glass, where you wear a frame, and then you have a tiny screen that you can control with your eye movement. Okay. So the applications, if you haven't heard about Google Glass, go to YouTube and check it out. But using Google Glass, of course, you can unlock things with eye movements, which is a huge step forward for pretty much anyone that can't do anything else.
In this paper, 2 people with tetraplegia, and there's 2 people who are unable to move their arms or their legs in any functionally useful way, were able to control a prosthetic or a robotic arm simply by thinking about the movement of their own paralyzed hand. And they did that using the investigational brain neural interface system. So they thought about using their own arm and hand as though they were reaching out themselves with their own limb, and the robotic arm moved much the way their own arm would have moved. One of the long-standing questions, not only in Europe.
This is here, right? Moving things by thinking. So the estimated time of arrival for the average consumer would be roughly 5 to 10 years, depending on where you are and what exactly you're trying to do. The person that is a quadriplegic and is using an exoskeleton, it's called an exoskeleton, which is like a suit that walks, right? Takes the last experiment that was done takes 3 years to learn how to do this, to walk with your brain waves, and it costs over $1 million for this suit. Okay. But Moore's law, exponential technology means these things are becoming available. The exoskeleton is an extreme case, right? But this would not be an extreme case, to be able to move things after a bit of training using your brain waves. I think this is very hopeful, even though it probably requires quite a bit of skills and training to actually do it. I mean, I haven't tried it, but I did try the Google Glass, the controlling with my eye movements and my voice, of course, and that was really quite interesting.
The internet is going to be in our contact lens. And when the internet is in our contact lens, you blink and you will go online. And if you meet somebody at a meeting, a conference, or a classroom, you don't know who they are, your glasses will identify who they are and print out their biography in your contact lens. So you will always know who you are talking to. At a cocktail party, you will always know who to suck up to if you're looking for a job.
So again, it sounds a little bit like science fiction, right? But the fact is that 12 pictures of you, 12 images of you, are enough to identify the average person, not if you look like, 70-year-old bald guy that everybody pretty much looks the same. It's harder, right? But if you have unique features to some degree, 12 images would be enough to identify you. Okay? So that part of it, of course, that's currently not allowed for obvious reasons. Right? But if you are dating in Japan, you can go to bars in Japan, it's allowed. You go to a bar and you hold up your mobile phone in front of the other person, and it will pull up the social network profile while you're speaking, and it says, I like dogs and I've been divorced twice, and so you move on. Right? Yeah. So that is already reality there. For us, regular, not disabled people, this is kind of bizarre, but if you are disabled, this could unlock a whole universe of possibilities. So there are clearly a couple of things that we should look at there. I mean, in terms of technology and how it moves, 2005, when the Pope was inaugurated, this was the picture on St. Peter's. Right? 2013, right? Everybody with a mobile phone. Right? 2020, it'll be this again, but everybody scanning with their iris. Right? That's a scary thought. Okay. Now, as I was preparing for this, I found a lot of evidence of people talking about the virtual future of social care. For example, using data and capturing data that is involved with the history of the patients, the mobile access they have on locations, and the monitoring and all the sensor networks and all these kind of things. You can download this report. It's about 80 pages if you're interested. I think it's quite a good resource. So here are some examples about how technology may change the lives of people that need care. And this is a general thing, not just about CP, but a general topic. I can now get applications and software for my doctor, and of course on the free market, that will explain in great detail what my issues are. This kind of stuff used to be available only to doctors themselves. But now I can actually drill into this issue using an iPad virtual illustration to find out more in 5 minutes about what I have and what I need to look at than ever before. So imagine if you're having an issue like, say, Alzheimer's or so, and you want to deep dive into this, you now have this huge ocean of information, which makes you feel better, I think, in the end, to be more informed. Right? This is now widely becoming available. You have social networks like Patients Like Me, and there's over 100 of those, where people talk about what they have and how they can improve their lives. I'm sure you're running your own social network for that reason, right, to support each other. Applications that allow remote monitoring, like this one does an eye test with your mobile phone. And there's hundreds of those. So do-it-yourself things like this are also, I think, quite empowering for people. Sensor networks, mobile services that remind people to take their medication. That's kind of becoming a standard now. I'm sure you know about these things. Devices that monitor your sleeping patterns. For this kind of thing, you'd have to go in the hospital for 10 days before. Now you can do it at home, and people can find out what the issues are about your sleep. So very helpful for lots of people. Remote patient monitoring. So basically, if you have 50 patients, you can use this in a dashboard to see what they're doing and how they're doing if they want you to see their data. Of course, there are lots of privacy issues here. But it's very powerful for those that take care to have this information available. And all this stuff that we're seeing. So basically, I would propose to you that if you're in the sector of care, you have to embrace transformation. I think half of your job in the future may well be to be a guide to technology changes for your patients, to help them actually find out where this is going. And if you're a parent, clearly you're already doing that. I mean, this is going to become more pronounced. As an example with the car companies about transformation. Right? This is a bunch of shots about the new BMW electric car, and this is a taxi, also by BMW, that drives itself. And this is the old BMW. So imagine if you were running this car company. This is, I don't know, a $150 billion enterprise, 140,000 employees. You're facing a transformation from this, which you know how to do, and you know how to sell this. But the future is going to be this. That's not the same. So transformation, I think it's very important also in terms of politics, as we've seen, with the recent elections here. Transforming, for example, from a carbon economy and a fossil fuel economy to renewable energy is very much the same. Now, here's a simple argument for politicians. Maybe we should convey the message to Canberra. You can make lots of money with this. You can make even more money with this. The money isn't any less. It's just who gets it is different. Right? And there's the difference. For example, this transition involves lots of really interesting economic scenarios, but it's not any worse or better. So exponential technology means that what sounds like science fiction today may be just mainstream in 5 to 8 years. This is Michael Douglas with the first mobile phone that was used in the movies. That was 20 years ago or something. Okay. Now we have mobile phones on the wristwatch with the Samsung watch. And we have Braille phones. If you're blind, you can make phone calls using a Braille phone. So this has become now the reality that what sounded like out of the movies is now real. And this is why we should embrace this and say, okay, can we find out what's going to be mainstream? For example, this device here. This is called the Smart Things device. You set this up at home, and it creates a network. And you can connect to it whatever you want, including, of course, your garage door opener, your air conditioning system, your heating system, your water system, your refrigerator, whatever you want, you can connect to it and control it through the mobile phone. So, for example, if you want to water your plants, you can't get up, you can use that. I mean, it boggles the mind to think about how this really could help disabled people to communicate. Google Glass, I mentioned earlier, the headset, this is one of the older headsets for using brain waves. This thing is very soon going to become this thing. So right now this looks like, you're going to be boarding a space flight to Venus 14 or something, right? But in the future it becomes as normal as using a mobile phone. And of course, care robots. I'm sure you have your thoughts on care robots, right? But this device here, these used to cost between $100,000 and $200,000. This one is $14,200, and the new one that's just being built is $4,000. So the question I have for you, are you ready for electronic team members? People who are working on your care team, are you ready for that? I mean, this is definitely coming. Should you be ready for that? I'm not sure, but can we imagine a future that is going to be without these guys? And this guy here over here is Baxter. Baxter was invented just 6 months ago, and it's a robot that learns. It's also the first robot that is safe to use in a home as a sort of an industrial machine. So this robot, you get behind it and you show it what to do, and it learns it. So people are using this for care a lot now. This is pretty mind-boggling. For example, now doctors and clinics are using this small robot that has other people on top of it. And this kind of goes along. You don't control it, just comes along like a companion. So a doctor making the rounds in the hospital now, he can look up, if he works in the cancer clinic, for example, he can look up 150,000 cases of the same cancer while he's standing at your bed. And he used to only remember 2 or 3 from his own records, right? But now he's got 150,000. Does it make him a better doctor? I'm not sure, but he has more data. Right? Does it make him more human? I doubt it. But at the same time, there are a lot of benefits to this. Right? About having this information amazing. So how far will we take this? I'll leave this for you to think about. I mean, I'm not sure we should take it there. Because when you think it through, that's the destination. So a key theme I would like you to think about is the overlap of humans and machines. I mean, clearly we're very much used to having machines. We have fancy wheelchairs, and we have all kinds of assisting devices. And many of those things are now becoming mainstream. And so what we're seeing now, it's basically moving into the future. Now finding a balance between those two things, right? This is a device called the Scanner-Do. And a friend of mine is just building this in California. The Scanner-Do is just a little device that connects to any mobile phone through Bluetooth. You can use it to give you a diagnosis from anything from the EEG and the body temperature and your heart rate and all these things in a remote way costs $100. Okay. And the Scanner-Do will also add very soon a blood pricker so that you can add that to the agenda. And this device would help people to be at home and essentially send off their update about what their current status is instantly. So of course you don't need somebody to come and visit you for this, which could be a drawback if you want to visit. Right? But at the same time, if you have to go to a clinic to do this, right, maybe there's not much benefit necessarily going to the clinic all the time just to do this. Again, it's a sort of it depends scenario. Right? I'm not saying it's a panacea, obviously not. Right? But imagine what would happen, for example, if everybody had those devices just as a part of the mobile phone subscription, which in fact is what is happening. The telecom companies are looking at this and saying, you know what, if you buy mobile phone from us, we'll give you a Scanner-Do. In many countries where I'm working, in Brazil or Indonesia, the government is considering making the internet free for disabled people and elderly. Making it entirely free. So if you're disabled, you get the parking card, that you can park in a special spot, and you get free internet, you get a free device. This would be, I think, a way forward to further the discussion. So here's my friend Spock. If you're as old as I am, you know who that is, right? This is Star Trek. Right? In his hand is a device called the tricorder. Right? This is, of course, a movie device, but the tricorder is able to just point it into a person, and then it says, okay, I got to do X, Y, Z and change the DNA as follows, and he just does it and you're healed. Right? This is, of course, science fiction. Right? But what we have now is this guy, forgot his name, Andraka, I think is his last name. He's 16 years old. He's inventing the tricorder. Right? This is a student. Right? And the tricorder this is a demo of it. It's the extension of the Scanner-Do that I just showed earlier. Right? This device is able to give you a diagnosis remotely that is better than a team of 10 doctors. That's the mission, allegedly. Right? I don't want to piss off any doctors, they're watching here remotely, because, obviously it's not human. But a device like this, I mean, this could be a life-saving device in many ways you look at it. Right? And the device becomes affordable in such a way to where it's a standard, like the Kindle. Imagine what it could do. So that's something that's going to happen in the very near future. We're going to have explosion in new interfaces, and here's an example.
Hello, my name is Janine. Let me introduce you to Lucy. Lucy is a special keyboard for people who can't use their hands easily. You can operate Lucy with a small laser that can be mounted on your glasses or headband. ABI began using.
You can check this out on YouTube yourself, but this device basically mounts the laser on your eyeglasses and you point it to a keyboard and then you can use that to type and communicate. You've seen it, I'm sure. Okay. And these, of course, these are clumsy. But looking at technology, what's happening now, what can you expect in 3 to 5 years? This will be just absolutely perfect. I mean, you could argue, of course, you don't need to point with a laser when you can just think, which is the next step. So a lot of research is being put into this because solving this problem would be a huge saver of funds, of course, for governments as well. I mean, having the disabled community be better served is eventually a financial saver as well. Costs more money initially, much like the carbon tax, the same problem, right? Costs more money initially, but saves money in the long run. So an example, for example, what Google is doing in this turf, Google has at least 100 initiatives that are worth mentioning in this. Of course, it's primarily meant for people who are not disabled, but the side effect of that is, for example, for those that can speak but cannot use motion. If you can speak somewhat normally into this device, this is what happens.
How many people live in Cape Cod?
The population of Cape Cod is 215,888.
Awesome. What's the weather like in Yarmouth?
It's 72 degrees and overcast. Here's a forecast for...
This works on any mobile phone. If you have an Android or iPhone, you just download the Google app, and you can speak into it. It's great while you're driving, for example. Just kidding. But anyway, I mean, you can voice control search. So if you could never actually type, this is obviously a big deal. If it can speak back to you, and then you can basically search now using your voice, if you can speak well. Right? Now the next step is, Google is working on the translate that if you don't speak well, it will reconstruct what you're searching for. Because what they're also working on is language translation. So the other day I tried this in the labs and I spoke in German. It came out in Chinese in real time. Right? This is mind-boggling stuff, and this is all going to happen in the next couple of years. So I have a friend in Portugal. I can talk to him in Portuguese, but I speak in English. It's more difficult when you have issues speaking, of course. It's much more difficult because they're all different. Right? But that will eventually be solved as well. So you could safely say that these things have become our external brain. And mobile devices are actually our second brain. So you have a question, you go to Wikipedia. You want to look at a map, you go to Google Maps. Do you have a question about the meaning of life, you go to Siri, just the iPhone. Whatever, I mean, you want to date, there's an app for that too. In fact, now there's 15 apps. If you want to get divorced, you can use an app. Right? It's too late for me, though. It's already behind that. But so the important part is that this is all happening for people who are not disabled, but now we're going to see all this happening for disabled people. Unlocking these interfaces. And this is, for most of these companies like Google, these are more side effects. They didn't build it for that reason. And vice versa, of course. But a lot of these things are now happening in a really interesting way that I found to be quite powerful. For example, the massive physical and behavioral mobility evolution. This is a public vehicle. Forgot where it was actually, but you can call this, and it's not self-driving, but it's essentially a vehicle that you can command for disabled people to show up at your doorstep that you can roll right into and drive away with it. My hunch is that these things will be self-driving and electric and public in the next, say, decade. And that's where the government should put some money. I mean, clearly these vehicles can be made for $5,000. So that's the question of how you run them. Now, the stair climbing wheelchair, this already exists, of course, you know that. But technology for this used to be extremely clumsy, expensive, didn't really work well. You can expect these things to just absolutely explode. I mean, a lot of these things are spin-offs from military applications, So they're very heavily invested in. And of course, this whole thing is happening with about, being excluded and stuff. You can have conversations now on your television with your grandparents. This is becoming quite common for people who are, this idea of being able to speak and control things.
be smart if you could close your garage door from your mobile phone? Well, you can. It all starts with the SmartThings Hub. Just plug in the hub, install any Zigbee-enabled garage door opener, and download the Garage Door Smart app from the SmartThings mobile platform. That's it. Your life just got smart.
Yeah, you know, I don't know why I would do this if I didn't have issues closing it in the first place. Right? But if you're disabled, I mean, this is obviously fantastic. If you can connect all these things and say, water my plants, right? Check out my refrigerator, buy pizza. Right? You know, obviously, this will be a dream come true if it works. You know, and of course, lots of people are putting actually serious money into making this work. For us able people, this is kind of bizarre. You know, why would I use this? I'm not sure. You know, but anyway, it's an interesting thing. So what happens now is also that we have access to the huge amount of content that's happening on the web about disabilities and about helping each other. For example, you know, I'm using smart television, which is becoming a standard now. I can tell the television to go out and say, find 50 best videos about CP. And I can just tell it and will do this for me. So I can feel like I have endless access to others who have similar issues. This companionship, okay, it's virtual, it's not real life, right? And it needs to be both in the end, right? But on pretty much any topic is very powerful. So the bottom line is now that we're living in a digital world, and I'll talk more about what that means on the flip side of things, but basically it's a global village now. Especially in CP, we've already seen this is a global discussion. So in this global village, as Marshall McLuhan called it, the global village, right, we're seeing a whole bunch of new kinds of companionships. And it's very easy for us to put this down that don't need it. You know, we can just go somewhere and have companionship. But if you can't do that, I think this is a huge step forward for people to have this kind of new companionship. And what has now been termed virtual togetherness, which must be from Silicon Valley, I suppose, you know, where you have remote connections using video. I mean, very soon, you know, of course, that the airlines are now getting into the business of teleportation, you know, transporting us to a place without flying. Once the carbon tax is actually approved, which it will be sooner or later, globally, then the airline ticket will cost the same as the carbon tax, or the other way around, rather. This is definitely coming. Just the question of when. So once that happens, a lot of airlines will transport us virtually. So you go to the airport and you end up being a hologram somewhere else. Or, you know, using teleconferencing equipment. I do a lot of this already. You go to a location, you go into a room, and then you virtually show up in the other room in Singapore. And this already works, it just cost $1 million. So we're going to see telepresence becoming a major tool for communication with people who are disabled to quickly go somewhere. And that's already happening with Skype and those kind of things, and of course Facebook and so on, right? But real-time video. Something to investigate, I think, also for your network here is to how can you use video to become more powerful as a glue? If this leads to the fact that you're not going to go see them because you can video call, that's exactly the same debate you had about the telephone in the 50s or the 30s, right? So the argument was you're not going to go and see your mother because you can call her. Yeah, that's maybe true in some cases, but in general it hasn't led to that, really. So that's something to keep an eye on, though. I think it's a kind of a gray area there. But anyway, you've seen the movie, hopefully. If not, you should watch it, Robot and Frank. Or Frank and Robot, I forget which way around it is. Fantastic movie that actually is very much on point about what's happening. These machines are going to get so cheap and so powerful that they become like a potted plant. Everybody will have one. Whether you want one is a different question, just like a plant or a pet. Right? But here's a scene from the movie, and of course the key challenge for us is defining useful versus creepy. Okay? You might find this very creepy. Somebody else may not. But I think the bottom line is that it very much depends on what you want. Some people would define a lot of technology as creepy. Right? For example, dating apps, I don't know, it's like 500 dating apps. You can go to a city and see who is around you, who has similar likes, and then you can contact them. You find that creepy? I would find that creepy, but it's very successful. So this is a relative question.
That cereal is full of unhealthy ingredients. I threw it away.
Don't throw away my stuff.
Frank, that cereal is for children. Enjoy this grapefruit.
You're for children.
Today we're going to start a garden.
Fuck this shit.
Frank, you need a project. Mental stimulation plus a regimented schedule will vastly improve your cognitive functioning. Besides, it's good exercise. Frank, we're going to have to work together.
You are a robot butler.
I'm not a butler, Frank. I'm a healthcare aide, programmed to monitor and improve your physical and mental health.
Yeah, get out of my house.
Well, watch the movie, you'll find out, how they actually build a relationship, how the robot becomes more human, creating vast problems. But anyway, this is sort of a peak of the future. I mean, if you take out this body, you could very easily say this is something sitting inside of a computer doing very much a similar thing. Right? A virtual assistant, a virtual butler, and of course virtual pets, which are huge in Japan, for example. A fake dog that comes to the door. It's powerful, but anyway, just kidding. So now we're looking at the future where everything becomes intelligent because it can. Why are the US authorities scanning everybody's email and inbox? And because they can. Right? Technology exists. Not the question that they should or shouldn't, right? This is a different question. But for example, home networks, the connected home, it's called the connected home, is becoming a reality rapidly. Your thermostat, your lighting control, your door control, your locks. So there's this device called O-Power, which is widely used in America. It's a smart meter that connects all of the homes, local network of air conditioning and heating to each other. And now they're debating in California if that should be mandatory, that your thermostat is a smart meter. Because when you do this, you can save up to 40% energy. Because if you leave the air conditioning on all day long, because you don't have a timer, and then you come home, it's nice and cold, using this, you can just turn it on the way home. If you're using too much energy because of cooking or whatever you're doing there, you can check with your neighbor, because you notice he's only used half the energy. So what is he doing? Can he help you figure this out? Right? So intelligent everything basically means the house, connected devices, connected people, of course. That brings up a lot of possibilities and lots of issues. But as you know, everything is moving into what's called the cloud, right? Cloud computing. Anyway, if this is a little bit technology heavy for you, I think it's a good thing because this is becoming like email. Yeah? So our movies are in the cloud, our music is in the cloud, our books is in the cloud, education will be in the cloud. So in 10 years, students will not have textbooks. They'll have a little device, it costs $5. Anything you want to read is there. All the notes in the classes, all the slideshows, all the video feeds, all the comments are in that box. So for healthcare and social care, if that's moving into the cloud, which it is, we're talking about A, tremendous savings, at least in the long run, B, also an entirely new way of transparency, and also finding out new ways of treatments and working together. And of course there are side effects, which I'll talk about. But Ray Kurzweil has said that today we're already in the situation where a kid in Africa with a smartphone has more information available than the president of the US 15 years ago. This is where we're at already today. So for health and medical and care, we're already looking at health moving into the cloud. In fact, there's a company called the Care Cloud, okay, that is allowing people to connect with each other and with their caregivers through the cloud, and to exchange documents and schedules and figure out where people are, and all these things. Of course, the biggest issue, once again, is whether you want to share your data. So, I mean, all of these devices, of course, can be connected, and lots of people are already doing this. In fact, I've started an experiment using a Wi-Fi connected scale. So you weigh yourself and you connect the scale to the internet, and you can compete with people about losing weight or gaining weight, for that matter. Right? Just as an experiment to see if they can encourage you. For example, the Nike shoe, you may know the Nike running shoes, they have a chip, all of them have a chip that connect from the shoe to your iPod. and from the iPod to the internet. Now there are 7 million people that are competing on running using that, and they're helping each other to actually keep up with the running, which creates an interesting mechanism. You could say it's sort of exhibitionism in a way, you know, but it's very helpful for those 7 million people to know that somebody else is keeping an eye on whether you're still running. I would find that to be a little bit strange to know that they know I didn't run, for example. Or I would worry about my insurance charging me more because I didn't run, or because I did run, for that matter. But anyway, so those are issues to look at. And of course, now what's happening, you're very familiar with this, I'm sure, is telemedicine and telecare. This is not a universal answer to all of our problems. But it's inevitable because technology is becoming cheaper and widely available. And B, there's a whole new way of figuring out how we can actually interact with this. And as I was saying earlier, you know, in this situation, doctors lose their control mechanism that I have to go there and sit and wait, right? And this is a big change in the system as well, because when the system gets to be more open, then we have more control. It's a little bit like TripAdvisor for hotels. I'm sure you've used TripAdvisor, yeah? So when in Europe, for example, if you go to a restaurant and you open up TripAdvisor on your mobile and you put TripAdvisor on the table, when the server comes up, right, they'll be put on notice that you're about to give a recommendation or not, right? And they act differently. In Italy, they don't care. Right? They tell you to go away. Right? But this transparency is changing the game. And this is really changing it for politicians as well. Imagine if all of the people that need care, that are giving care, and are in this discussion, are connected and creating a huge amount of conversation. Last year, there were 56 laws overturned by Facebook action. So people got together on Facebook and said, this law in this country can't stand like this, we have to do something, or it shouldn't be passed in the first place. And because of collective action on Facebook and other websites, 56 laws were overturned or not ratified, including the SOPA Act, which is an act about internet privacy. So a lot of really interesting stuff. So the question I have for you, I don't know, I don't really have enough information to deep dive into this, but is technology actually resetting what disability means? I think it is. In fact, it's also resetting what us able-bodied can actually do with our own body, which gets to be really science fiction. Right? But for disability, you could safely say all these advances are going to change what it means to be disabled. And to me, it's utterly crucial that this is not creating more inequality in the sense of those that have the money can participate in all of this, and everybody else is screwed. Right? Because that creates the same scenario that we had before. The technology is only available for the privileged. I don't think that's going to happen, though, because obviously the wide-scale adoption of this technology is already here, using mobile phones, and is in the interest of government to actually proceed this. So imagine a world where, A, technology becomes ubiquitous, cheap, and super easy to use. I gave my mother an iPad. She's 77. It's easy to use. I set it up in such a way that it was really foolproof. Of course, she found a way to make it break. But anyway, she's using it now, and for her, it's the television. She calls it the television. She doesn't know it's the internet or a computer. You know? It's the television. So she's in bed watching television on it. And when she calls me and says, the television is broken, I'm saying, it's not the television, it's your iPad. The television is downstairs. Doesn't use it anymore. So this technology looks extremely geeky now. Augmented reality, Google Glasses, you know, virtual reality, you have it, right? Looks like out of a Cory Doctorow novel. Right? But this reality is this will become so easy to use and so cheap that we'll all have to think about what we do about this. So the interface adapts to you, not the other way around. This is a huge step forward. When you're in your home, the home will adapt to you using technology. That includes the physical home, which is another thing that home builders are working on, that you can move furniture around remotely. You want this couch to show up because now you're going to sit on the couch, but you need it to wheel out with a wheelchair, you move it over. Already exists too, of course it's expensive. You can participate now if you're disabled. Participate in conversation, participate with other people. Of course, you're already doing this, a social network. But in any way within your means, and you can even contribute formerly known as work. You can actually work. How can you do that? Well, if you can actually control a computer interface, you can work. You can translate, for example. This is already happening in Africa. People are translating through mobile phones, one word at a time, and earning money through translating stuff to the mobile phone. So you can connect with like-minded people, which is huge. I mean, that's already happening, but think about video becoming the primary source of this. Yes, there could be many abuses of this as well, but okay, you can get your voices heard. I mean, I think the number one reason that we don't have a lot of legislation that goes far enough in supporting all these things because our voices are not heard in the overall context. Right? And now we can solve this. Of course, there are more voices with other things as well, right? So it's not as simple as that. There's a bit of a noise threshold, right? You have the power of choice. I mean, this is happening in this country with the reform, right? Being able to pick exactly what you want. It creates a lot of pressure, I'm sure, on everybody in the food chain. Right? But having a choice is, of course, what it's all about. Right? And also the responsibility. So you will see a lot of aberrations in technology. Here's one of those aberrations.
Is using technology to help make it easier for moms to know when their infant needs a change. Called TweetPee, a sensor shaped like a little blue bird attaches to the front of the diaper and detects moisture when the baby lets a little something go. Then that sensor sends a tweet to mom or dad letting them know that it's time to get up and change the child. The TweetPee application allows users to monitor and keep track of the...
No, you thought this was a joke, it's actually serious, right? And only Americans can think of these things. Just kidding. Germans can do that as well. But anyway, you know, you will see a lot of aberrations about technology. I think it's important for caregivers and organizations to weed out some of that noise, you know, obviously like this one. And then I think, you know, once, you know, disabled people are kind of set free using technology and becoming the sort of, you know, the reversal of this, you know, all the small fish chasing the big fish, and then, of course, there's also new responsibilities. For example, you can't say you want more choice, but you don't want responsibility. I mean, that, of course, that is related. You're going to have more choice with technology, then you have to actually do something. And I think it's up to the organizations that deal with social care to also advance this level of being able to be responsible, whether you're disabled or not, with technology. So the other real challenge is that because of technology now, we're entering an age now where people are thinking of humans as machines. Because it's a lot easier that way. You know? So essentially, that you're thinking that whatever the problem is, we can fix it with an app. You know, there's an app for that. Right? You just get an app and you'll be fine. Okay? It's exactly like saying, you know, you have a problem, you take a pill, it goes away. Well, it doesn't, you know, problems don't just get solved with pills. Right? So there's one of the issues of machine thinking. Okay? We don't want to be the victims of machine thinking. Because the people that we take care of are not machines, and they'll never be machines. And so we use machines to do the job, just like we use a mobile phone or a car. But the car isn't the job. Or the mobile phone isn't the job. So I think this is an important issue for the future. And this is sort of the yin and yang between those two things. You know, technology and humanity have to be related. So technology is mind-boggling, but human qualities remain the core. Technology should not be replacing what we do with people, but augment it or enhance it or make it possible. And there's a real danger here in that, you know, especially in the area of disability and the elderly, that we think of this as some sort of machine process, right? Which is a total trap because it's not going to go anywhere, obviously. Right? So this becomes really important. So the next big challenge after technology, once we have technology locked down, the next 5 years will be very busy with new technologies. But it's really about ethics. Who decides whether it's creepy or not? Do people have a choice? Do we make them do this because it's cheaper? Ethical questions, of course, are on the core of all these conversations. Again, you know, enablement, empowerment also means responsibility. And, of course, somewhat of a bitter pill here for us. Quite a few jobs may disappear. Well, in fact, some of my futurist colleagues are saying that 2 billion jobs will disappear in the next 10 to 20 years. And there's only 3.5 billion jobs on the planet. Here's an example. Checkout clerks, not needed. When when the box has a code that you just scan, do you need a checkout clerk? 27 million people right there. Maybe in the Whole Foods market you need it, but in a safe way. The 3D printing machine. This is becoming standard equipment now. You can print an iPhone cover, you can print a shoe. Very soon you can print a printer to copy something and just print it at home. So you don't go to the store to get an iPhone cover, you print it at home using a composite material. 41 million or so taxi drivers, bus drivers, replaced by self-driving machines. Probably not in all countries, but so the list goes on, right? And of course the care robot, will that replace the person taking care? I kind of doubt it. But then again, you could say if it's just somebody lifting, it will replace that person. Okay. So here's a big but. I think this, in general, it's quite true that technology will automate away a lot of jobs. For example, if you're in the financial business and you're looking at analyzing data all day long to figure out if you should buy that stock or not, or how much your house is worth or so, computers can do that. You don't have to be a human to dredge up data and make sense of it. To a certain degree, you have to then make a conclusion, which is different. Right? So you're looking at roughly 12.5 million jobs that are in the financial data business that can be automated to a very large degree. But the big but is this, right? I think for your sector, is that I think we're facing an increasing importance of human-only skills. Right? That is, of course, conversation, emotions, creativity, problem-solving, negotiation, all the things that machines currently can't do. Eventually, maybe they could do that. Right? But, for example, asking questions. Machines don't ask questions. Right? Sometimes you have to ask a question rather than give an answer, right, to actually get anywhere. And if you're looking at, of course, this picture of left and right brain is kind of old-fashioned, but I'll stay with it for a second. The jobs are moving in this direction. Right? And to the right brain, it says that this is important not to just know the facts and have the data, but to deal with emotions and actually the other part of the equation. So my view is that if you're in this job, you shouldn't be looking to replace machines, for example, lifting people. Machines can do that. Or to do marginal jobs like cracking data. Software can do that. But to focus on the human-only jobs, which there are plenty of. In Switzerland, we have an initiative to get a basic coverage of salary for every person for $3,000 a month, roughly, even if you don't work. This is an initiative that's being voted on right now. So that in 5 years, every Swiss citizen will get $3,000 a month regardless of what they do, minimum wage, for this reason. This discussion you'll have in Australia eventually because, when lots of jobs are automated, you're going to get paid just to be there and do things. Right? It's a logical consequence. Right? But, considering your recent election, that is a step in a different direction. Right? All right, so I think for your own job in future, it's really about becoming more human using technology, not less. Right? And anything that makes you less human because you're using technology is not a good thing in general, because that discussion is widespread. Mobilization. This is a huge opportunity. If you're in the caregiving business or you're a caregiver, using mobile is completely logical. For example, having mobile websites, mobile apps. I mean, this is clearly, you don't know about this stuff already. So I have to come to the end because we're going to have some questions. But important is this, okay? For our, if you are disabled, as well as when you're taking care, is to reimagine what the future looks like. Because the future is never going to be just an extension of the present. So, for example, in the 50s, people have already reimagined the car business. These people, this is actually from the 30s even. Okay, this is a car company that said this is the future. People sitting in the car that drives itself, and we play chess and have lunch. Right? This is from the 30s, right? And this is going to be real. So if you had to draw a picture of the future, of your future, personal or otherwise, like this, what would it be? This would be a good assignment until I see you next time. Draw a picture. Right? I think this is very important to have an imagination, reimagination. I mean, the global shift in jobs is very painful for those that it's shifting from. Right? But LinkedIn has an interesting graph about what's happening on their website. All the red ones are the ones that are shrinking. Right? Pharmaceutical, telecom, banking. Thank God you're not in those businesses. Right? I don't agree with the restaurants, by the way. But newspapers, obviously. You don't want to be in the newspaper business. It's shrinking. But over here are you guys. Right? Yeah? Hospital, healthcare. I mean, they don't have the social care part, health, wellness, fitness, whatever. But this part of it is growing. And it's not the part that is done by machines, but the part that's done by people because they have people skills. That's what's growing. So you want to use technology to automate whatever you can as long as it remains human. But I mean, if you're looking at all the stuff that's growing, philanthropy, e-learning, public policy, that's a good perspective for the future, I think, if you are prepared for it. So shortly about general trends, what's happening, and then we'll take some questions. What we need to think about is how can we act as an ecosystem? Because basically what has happened because of digital technology and in general terms in economy is that we moved from this idea of what is called an egonomy, an ecosystem, which basically means large companies, large governments, large players dominating, like Microsoft did or others, to a system that's more like a biosphere, okay? Referred to as an ecosystem. Not in terms of ecology, right? In terms of logic. Everything you do in social care is connected. You're not that one person who is dominating this entire food chain, right? You're not running the whole universe of this, like Universal Music or Paramount Studios, or you're not running the system. Like oil companies, that's what they do, right? They run the whole thing from A to Z, and they get $1 trillion worth of subsidies a year to make lots of money back. Right? That's what they do very successfully. Right? But the future is about this, right? The future is about creating an ecosystem that is interconnected to where, okay, this guy can die, but the ecosystem will survive because it's not at the top. Right? It's decentralized. So this is what we're seeing in general terms, and I believe that sustainable is becoming the default requirement. Because if you're not sustainable, what are you going to do? You're just going to borrow from the future. That's what we're doing now. When you don't have a carbon tax or you don't have mechanisms to change to different energy, you're just borrowing from your kids, as simple as that. And this is in general true, of course, when you look into social context. So basically what we're seeing is what is referred to as the triple bottom line. This is a very good motto, I think, for your work. People, planet, profit. You need all three. You don't just need this one. Okay? And the governments around the world that I'm working with, they're realizing if they only shoot for profit, they end up with less because it depletes the others. Okay? So I think it's a very important principle, moving towards the triple bottom line and this whole idea of what's happening here in this, is it social, is it bearable, is it equitable, and so on. Quick summary, and then we'll take some questions. Point one. The world is transforming rapidly. Okay, so therefore, our tasks include rapid transformation. We can't sit here and say we're going to just observe and then do something. It doesn't work anymore because at this speed, by the time we're done observing, we already went over the cliff. That's why it's very important also in political terms to prepare for the transformation of the care business using technology and, of course, other mechanisms. Technology is bringing exponential change. What you think is science fiction today is total utter reality in 3 years. So it doesn't help to say that we're just going to wait until it appears. It is impossible to remain human linear. That's of course the flip side of this. And balance in that case, of course, is the most crucial requirement. Some people will say, I'll move to the Amazon, I'll never touch a mobile phone again, or I'll become Amish or whatever. That's fine. But for most of us, this reality doesn't exist. So therefore also, we can't live in a life that says either we're online and therefore we're going to be completely naked to everyone who wants to look, or we're going to be offline and be protected. That's not a very good alternative. We need a way of having both. need a balance. So a really important thing, I think, spend 3 to 5% of your everyday work discovering tomorrow's logic. And this is, even if you don't work, this is a very good exercise. Thinking about what is going to come after what you do today. And if you are disabled, to spend this much of your time thinking about what is coming to you in the future and what people are doing using YouTube and social network, I think is a very good exercise. As technology becomes ubiquitous, fast, and cheap, it'll be all about ethics. So anyway, we have to think about this. Right now, it's a big deal if we can use technology to virtually transport ourselves. It would be great if everybody could have it. But once we have it, it's really about this. Who should pay what? Should it be free? Should it be public? Should it be available to everyone? This is a question of ethics. Okay, for us that take care of people, for you that care organizations, I think it's really important to learn, embrace, and use technology. You can't actually learn how to swim without getting wet. You're talking about social networks and how you want to use social networks, but you're not a member yourself. How are you going to ever know what it is that people do there? So that's very important, but we have to also reject this kind of idea that the whole thing is a giant machine. And we'll just have to put a little bit of oil on it and it'll be fine. It's not. Right? It's not a machine. It's all about the balance between the two. So the ecosystems. We're moving towards a world where everything is interdependent and it's about hyper-collaboration, not competition. The government wants you to compete, of course, with healthcare, with services of social care, which is normal, but it doesn't mean you have to be competitive with your collaborators. So still the whole idea is going to be about hyper-collaboration. So everything is becoming sustainable. So I think the future of success, defining success would be based on a biosphere. The thinking of what I showed with that circle rather than the pyramid. I want to leave you with a quote from Alan Kay, the famous computer scientist, who said, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." So I hope that's what you can do every day, invent a little bit more of this. And thanks for your time. You can download my presentation sometime later today when I get to the airport at futuristgerd.com. And I also have a website called Gerd Cloud, which is, if you know Dropbox, it's a service where you can share files. You can go there and download all of my books and presentations for free. It's just a directory. So I have various books on topics you can download and slideshows. Thanks very much.
Well, to start with, thank you very much for a very inspiring presentation. I found it's fascinating to hear you speaking while the idea seems to be floating around. I think it's been very explicitly presented, so thank you very much for that. The question for me is, where do I go from here? Who can I see? And I don't know whether you're the right person to answer this. Probably need someone more local, but I want to do something now for the person who I'm caring for. And obviously every person is very different in terms of their needs. Who is around here in Sydney who can advise me on, when I tell them these are specific needs I have, what can I do about it?
Well, I suppose that the CP Alliance can create resources to point you in that direction. I mean, this is not really rocket science. There's a lot of stuff out there, but you have to have a filter. You can go to Twitter and search for this to get 5,000 responses. So it would be nice to have a directory, for example, interesting apps or videos. I mean, this is very simple to do. Because ultimately, the stuff that we're looking for in many ways already exists. It may have to be adapted. Yes. to really fit, right? But to create a resource directory would be great. I mean, video, of course, is, I basically say, if you want to go to YouTube and just create a playlist of videos, and then you share that with others, Yeah. But a lot of people are doing this, and I work with lots of non-profit organizations, for example, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and what they do is they create a playlist, for example, saying about carbon tax. So they have 100 videos on carbon tax rated. And you can go there and talk about it. So this is a simple thing you could easily do.
If I could just add to that, is with a number of new modules that we're putting on the website, we're hoping that there'll be discussion forums and where we can contribute and then actually crowdsource ideas and apps and reviews and that kind of thing from our community of clients and families as well. So that's one thing that we're doing, but we're also, I think, in the next 3 years got to be putting a lot more attention into having, and in fact we're hosting hopefully a think tank around technology pretty soon to get a whole lot of really good partnerships going with the universities and that kind of thing to accelerate our efforts in that area, so that might help as well. Fiona?
Another thing is to start a blog yourself. For example, I started a new blog on Tumblr, which is an online platform called Tumblr. That's very viral and totally easy to use, T-U-M-B-L-R. And I started a new blog on human futures, talking about what's happening with the machine future overlap. In a very short time, I got like 30,000 people contributing. I mean, starting your own blog and saying, okay, I'm taking care of a person that has this problem. And I'm collecting ideas, right? And blogging about it yourself and putting that stuff out will get you also flow back from others who do similar things, right? So sometimes it's better to participate and actually publish, because people publish back at you, and then you become an expert, right? I mean, you wouldn't believe how quickly you can become an expert in this way, using this kind of mechanism. Right? And the good part is that maybe 90% of this will not be feasible for you to do because of budget and other things, right? But the process of hearing about it changes your work anyway.
I had a quick question. In terms of, at what point do you know, let's say an organisation is ready for a particular type of technology, and what process would you go through to ensure that it was the right time?
Well, what you do for this, usually you create simulations, called simulations, right? So you create a exercise where you say, if we had this, for example, or let's assume we can use this, for example, just what I do a lot with people is say, okay, if you are interested in using video, for example, let's get 10 of these guys in a room from this organization and we shoot videos from each other, with each other, doing interviews, and then we look at them. And before, we don't publish them, we just pretend that we're going to publish them. Right? So we are simulating this new reality. And when you're simulating this, then all of a sudden you realize that if we were to actually do this, this is what it would feel like. So a good simulation for an organization, for example, is let's spend 3 weeks doing our entire work on mobile phones, no computers. Because that's where the world is going. If you can't do it for 3 weeks, make it 1 week. Okay? Everything you do, your spreadsheets, your email, all on mobile devices. Because then you realize this is where 80% of the world's traffic on the internet is going to be mobile. So if your website is not mobile optimized, you're in deep trouble. Nobody will actually pay any attention to it. So this is a great simulation. Doing simulations has a great advantage is because it's not intellectual exercise. You get your boss to come into a room and say, this is what's happening, and then he'll say, okay, cool, I knew about it, but I'm not interested. Right? You have to actually get inside before you can estimate what it's like. The rest is just theory. So simulation is a good exercise.
Lee, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Do you see technology ever tightly covering every need of every person with a disability in the world?
Well, let's put it this way. A lot of money is spent on creating these consumer-oriented tools that we've seen, right? And as part of that, a lot of what's coming out of this research to get regular people to use technology is solving very large problems for disabled people. So I don't think we'll get to 100%, clearly. And the question is, at what cost? Right?
So, but basically, you're really talking about the developing world.
Yes, and in fact, in the developing world, these are huge issues that people spend money on because they have large countries, like Brazil is 240 million people, right? So they have more incentive to move forward. I think the overall answer to this is that science and technology, because it's exponential, there's like 100 issues that have been stacked up that's being solved one by one, which is very scary, in fact, when you look at the overall range of things, right? But, gene technology, DNA analysis, and I mean all this nanotechnology and all these things can be extremely worrisome for those that are not going to depend on it. But I think if you need it, there's obviously a gift. You know, it's fantastic if you can use it. So I'm not a scientist, so I can't really conclusively answer the question of when. You know, I would just say that because it's exponential, we're going to be looking at stuff that we think is completely fiction coming true in many ways. I mean, just the thought of controlling with your brain waves, controlling things like devices, that is going to be our reality in 5 years. So I think we'll have to practice it, and we'll have to, you know, it won't be perfect. We can't fly a ship, fly an airplane with that quite yet, but I think it will get there very quickly.
I think probably for me the one that struck home was the taxi that arrives through, you just call it up through brainwaves. I'm sure the people that we see waiting for accessible taxis here for hours and hours and hours, or being left in the cold outside a gig at the entertainment centre on a cold Saturday night waiting for a taxi, I think that's going to be the kicker. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Well, you know, the taxi thing is a low-hanging fruit, which will take longer when you don't have a big population or big cities, you know, clearly. Like in this country, distances are huge. So it's much harder to solve that here than to solve it in, you know, in Sao Paulo, when you have more density.
Could I just ask that the robot carer that helps and lifts and all that type of thing, I mean, how far away is that? And what sort of cost would a person be looking at? I mean, and how long would it take to actually, I mean, because they're all very different needs that are involved, how long would it take to actually program a machine to do exactly what you need, and how intricate could they be?
Good question. Well, the robot is here. I mean, where
do you buy them? How much?
No, I mean they're widely used already. I mean, in the U.S. and in Japan and Korea, you have elder care, robots, and they can do things like wash the dishes or lift the other bathtub, or you know, and they range. I mean, they're widely. I mean, there's thousands of companies are looking at this, right? Because clearly, it's not just a good business. It's also basically sort of a mind-changing experience when you actually can use these machines. I mean, for example, take simple like the RoboVac, you know, which is a robotic vacuum cleaner. You know, that used to be what, $5,000. Now it's $100. You put it on the ground and it learns the layout of your living room, and it does a good job vacuuming, right? I mean, this is primitive, of course, right? So, but the Baxter robot that I showed you here is $27,000, and is back ordered. I think 550,000 units are back ordered. Yeah. And this is not for the home. This is for production things, you know. So the smallest robot for the home is called the ATEM or something. It's $4,500. Right? But then, you know, you can have a robot that walks around and has a video screen, for example, so that you can communicate with people. You know, those things are very cheap. So I think what we're looking at is a time frame of 3 to 5 years in all reality. I think in 10 years the government will give you one, because the cost will be lower than not having one. Wow. And then we'll get to ethical problems, right? For example, can somebody else take charge of my robot, look at me through the robot? Or can my insurance change because the robot has learned what I really do? Right? But don't worry about those issues now. I think for a large degree, having that available is like having a mobile phone. Sure, it's a benefit to have a mobile phone. It can be a curse, but by and large, it's a benefit. I mean, let's not be too naive about this. There'll be major issues about this, of course. But if you are disabled, you know, would you rather have that, or would you rather not have it? And it's like, in a way, like taking a cholesterol pill. You know, you could say you don't take one and maybe you'll die earlier. But what is the burden of taking one? You know, usually not that big, so you'd rather take one. You know, so this is one of those issues I think that we're looking at.
I've only just got one final question, and that's around education, because you said that you were doing some work with the university in Brazil. So in terms of the future of education, say for people with a disability, I mean, and anybody in fact, would we be moving towards global educational institutions, or are we already there with that, and doing everything online?
Well, we're not there yet for many reasons, but clearly a person with CP will be able to get a PhD in this system. I mean, there's nothing, I mean, because unless you have mental incapabilities, intellectual issues, which some don't and some do, right? It's the question ultimately of interface. You can't go to the university every day, so that makes it difficult. You can't move your hands, maybe you can't speak. But ultimately, those things are solved, and because of the interface, you can do anything. Right? I mean, you can, in fact, become a worker through the network. Right? Whether that's going to be personally satisfying of not being in a place, that's a different debate. Right? There's always a flip side of that. But education is moving entirely in the digital network. I mean, clearly, the government spends trillions of dollars around the world, printing books and shipping them, and they're never picked up, and they don't get recycled, and then the students lose them. The main reason that Africans or Brazilians or so don't have education, because there are no books. So you give them a $5 solar-powered device and an internet network, which is not hard to create with a mobile device, and tap them into whatever they want to learn. That's definitely going to happen. I mean, the government can save half the budget and put it back into other things that are neighboring education. Having said that, of course, at the same time that you have to maintain the educational institutions because they do real-life learning. Right? But they will be really impacted by this, of course. The question is, for example, are you going to hire a disabled person that can crack the code, for example, for a big security issue for a bank? Right? That person maybe not able to move at all. In fact, it could be a quadriplegic. Right? But it could solve this problem because of what they've learned. That's definitely going to happen.
So it's a greater equality, obviously, is what the
There's
future...
a greater equality. I mean, it creates an interesting debate about, who's qualified and who do you have a degree or do you not have a degree? But, there's already a trend that says basically you don't send your kids to school to get an MBA, you just send them off to an internship. And they learn how to do this, and you give them money to learn it rather than to get a degree. I'm not sure that's the right strategy, but again, it's probably a mix between the two.
Gerd, if you could give us all some general advice about preparing for the future, what should we be doing to prepare for the future?
Yes, well, we have to go back to what we did as children, right? Which is to investigate and to play with stuff and experiment and waste time. If you're not prepared to waste time, how are you going to ever discover anything? So you don't start by saying, when I do this, I will have achieved the following. That's not how it works. And discovering something means that you're ready to say, well, I didn't discover anything. But to allocate a certain amount of your daily work, 3 to 5%, sometimes 10%, in my case, it's 50%, to where I go out and I just look at stuff and I collect this. Right? And I make notes and I kind of shelve things away for future scenarios. So having foresight be part of your life is really, so you know what's coming and you get a feel for things and to observe. And it's all here, we're just not looking. So the job is not so much to say, well, where is it? But to say, well, yes, I'm going to take a look. I mean, it's all happening here right now. So we're not talking about 20 years from now, we're talking about 3 to 5 years. So if you just observe what's happening, eventually you can't help but understand what goes on. So, being able to, not be as result driven. Right? So in many companies, this is a huge problem because they just beat you and beat you and beat you to get results going. And eventually you don't have any results because you're just beaten. I mean, it's an illusion, of course, that this creates bigger success, which in the end it doesn't. So, I mean, the Google rule is that everybody who works at Google has to spend between 10 and 20% of their time on new projects unrelated to their current work. And if they don't do that, they get fired. And this is why they're so extremely powerful. They've got over 1,000 projects incubating. But you have to unlock that potential by telling people, you know what, go off and have some sushi and then go away and do something wacko. Right? Think of something that is not here. This is just part of the environment. So going back to that playfulness, that we usually have if we're not at work, right, is to unlock that again. I think that is the key. Thank you.